Hello and welcome to the Showfile Podcast, a podcast for performance nerds. My name's Tom, founder of A Work in Progress, a live electronic music direction company, and this is the Synths episode. Oscar and I rambled for about 3.5 hours about synthesizers, and I cut it down to about 2.5 hours of kind of stuff you'd actually want to watch. But that's still a little bit long for a Showfile episode, so we decided to turn it into 2 separate episodes, like a 2-for-1 on synthesizers for you. So enjoy! You know how we start.
Oh yeah.
Would you like to lead us or shall I?
You take the lead, my good man.
All right. You ready?
Right.
Okay.
Podcast.
Okay. It sounds so weird with the granular on doing like music to meditate to.
Yeah.
Lo-fi beats to meditate to.
That's a great niche.
Welcome to the Showfile Podcast, a podcast for performance nerds. My name's Tom, founder of A Work in Progress, a live electronic music direction company. I have a cold, and this is the synth episode. Do I have a cold, or have I lost my voice from podcasting? It's a dangerous gig. And welcome, Oscar.
Hello.
Oscar is back.
Yeah.
For the synth episode.
Oh yeah.
Because not only are you good at guitars, you're also good at synths. You did a combination degree of guitars and synthesizers.
Well, yeah, supposed to be studying guitars and then got into club music.
Oh man, sounds like my younger years.
Yeah.
It gets all of us in the end.
Oh yeah. It's a rabbit hole.
Right. Oscar, you're one of our music directors.
I am indeed.
And you're an artist in your own right.
A little bit.
A little bit. Occasionally. Moonlight, how's
Occasionally.
Go on, tell us a bit more about you. What is an Oscar? Who is an Oscar? How does an Oscar? The components of the Oscar.
Well, I guess the big one for this episode is a big old synthesis nerd.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I think you've now got to the point where rather than buying things with jacks, that you have to patch it with a crocodile clip.
Yeah.
Which, I feel like I can identify as someone has the same problematic relationship with coffee.
Yeah.
Where there's a certain level that you get to where you're like, what is my life? But also, I'm consenting to these decisions and I'm much happier as a being because of them.
But there's definitely, there's no going back.
No, there's fucking not going back. When you're on the crocodile clips, that's it, mate. Yeah. You're there for life. Yeah. There's no detox from that, Oscar. There's only pulsar forever.
Yeah. Drum synths and granulars.
Drum synths and granulars. On crocodile clips.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's sick. And the tunes are good, so it's clearly doing something right. Right, so this is a synth episode. We're going to talk about synthesizers. We're going to talk about how we approach synthesizers in shows, which I think probably drums, synths, and backing tracks are like the main things that we're doing a lot of with lots of clients. I mean, in modern music, synths are pretty commonplace.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yep.
There's like a few ways to approach them, which we'll go through today. And yeah, they're pretty commonplace in all types of music, not just electronic music, but obviously we have done quite a lot. So we've got a few things here that are like our kind of go-tos for a lot of sounds that we'll do some programming with. We've got our trusty track that we've been using for all the podcasts.
That we know and love. I wrote it in a coffee shop in Hong Kong, drinking a very expensive cup of anaerobic fermented Colombian coffee that tasted like passion fruit. Mad.
Yeah, well, you've got a problematic relationship with synthesizers that only use crocodile clips.
Yep.
I have a problematic relationship with anaerobic fermented Colombian coffee that I drink in Hong Kong. That's just where we're at today, bro.
Yeah.
So it is. So yeah, we'll go through the track. There's a whole bunch of different synth bits. We've got some MIDI for it. And we can dig into some of those sounds and talk about choosing the right sounds, choosing the right way to reproduce those sounds, whether you're sampling them against synthesizing them.
and all that kind of stuff. So probably a good place to start is have a listen to the source material. Whenever you're looking at how to perform a track, I mean, that's where you begin, isn't
Job
it?
number one.
Let's be real. So here's the tune that we're going to be working on. So you can already hear it's like quite a lot of synthy stuff going on.
Yeah, synth-driven.
Synth-driven, definitely. Nice big bass line there. Some guitar and stuff. Just make sure that some of the MIDI for later on isn't unmuted. Isn't. Okay, loads of synths there. Probably like some really obvious things to hone in on when we're looking at what part to choose. Okay, cool.
Nice.
So that's fun. Little tune there.
Very fun.
Little ditty. Okay, so choosing those parts, we have a bit of a methodology for it, I guess. Where you'll be looking at, what your artist needs, what are they playing, what kind of boxes do you have available, what does the artist own, what can we hire, like there's lots of different ways. And I guess the first kind of start of that is then like choosing the parts that we're going to use, that the artist is going to play.
Yeah.
And then once we've chosen those parts, being like, okay, cool, like what is that? What sound is that? Is it going to be easy to synthesize it? Should we make a sampler from it? Is it going to be played on keys? Is it not going to be played on keys? There's quite a few things that we need to put into that decision, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely the keys, not keys, being either, a traditional keyboard, not a traditional keyboard, and kind of modulating it and it being sequenced. Yeah,
totally. These are all like different options that you have. So we need to kind of like figure out which one of those is going to be best. The access that you have to the source material is normally a big part of this, right?
Yeah.
Because, if you have... If you're working with like a producer, chances are they'll be able to tell you exactly where they got that sound from. If you're working with an artist who's a singer or something, it's quite likely that they won't have been as involved in specifically making each sound. I mean, that's not a rule. It's definitely like artists in our client base who are very, very hands-on with their sound design.
Yeah.
But some people may not know that, or it may just be that it was made in a studio somewhere in the world on a synthesizer that artist does not own, and like that is just what it is.
And partly part of something bigger or resampled or
exactly. So you need to like figure out what's going on with that and then choose your best kind of path to like getting the best sound for that. I mean, there's definitely on Kidnap, a show that we did recently, he used a very specific sound on a Juno GI on like loads of his album. And he said, like this is the sound of loads of stuff. Like it would be really great if we could bring this on the road. And I was like, well, the Roland Juno GI has been discontinued for years, like literally years. So, we can't bring that out on a gig because if it breaks, fucked. And you're still making records with it. Like, let's keep it in the studio. So we went in and made some really, really high resolution samplers.
Pretty serious.
Yeah, I mean, it took quite a long time to get them right. But that was partly because of getting each pass of each note at a decent resolution. Like, when you've got sort of like 3 notes per pass and each pass needs to be, 30 seconds long or whatever, you can just do the maths and figure out how much the recording is before you even then have to put that in a sampler. But it did mean that we had this instrument that was true to the sound of the artist's production, And it meant that, you know, when we are going through and like maybe creating new parts or needing to carve out space for sounds, it's kind of like, well, we just use this patch from the Juno and like it just fits.
Yeah.
It just sounds right.
Yeah.
You know, the vibe is right. All the sound design is already there. Like, don't really need to do a lot to it because it kind of makes sense. It's like maybe a little bit of EQ, bit of reverb, whatever.
Yeah.
It like really streamlined that process. But, you know, he's also, as a producer, very hands-on with his sound design, does a lot of it himself. So it's like, it's easy with him to then say like, oh, where'd you get this from? And he goes, oh, yeah, this one. You're like, oh, thanks, man. This is going to be really easy. That's not necessarily always the case. Or, you know, sometimes stuff has come from weird shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Producers love modular rigs, as you know. Sometimes those sounds came from a 4-hour jam that you then chopped up into tiny little bits.
Yeah, and bounced to tape.
Bounced it to tape. Of course you bounced it to tape. No, but like that's part of the process, right? And like that's where you're doing your sound design, like driving it through some tape or something might be that little, just gets those transients right. So now it sits nicely with your drums and it's like, you know, going back and re-engineering that might be a waste of time.
Yeah.
Who knows? But yeah, so there's sort of 3 categories, right?
Yeah.
Of how we approach it anyway.
Yeah, I think so.
Which would be software, obviously, things in the box.
Yep.
Hardware.
Yep.
Real boxes. And experimental stuff.
Yep.
Which is moving more into like modular, untraditional synthesis.
Yep.
By like non-traditional, I would say things like granular, additive, FM, the kind of things where it's like it's a bit more sound designy. Yeah. It's not necessarily gonna just give you like traditional sounds.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for you doing that, but like
yeah, you know. Definitely. And I think kind of something that I the way that I think of it being like effects synthesis. So you're using synths, but you're using them not for something musical. It's something kind of, one-shotty, risers, that kind of vibe.
Vibes.
Yeah.
They're for vibes.
Yeah.
Rather than musical stuff. But also, you know, if you're performing techno and things like that, those are really important parts of what you're doing. To, you know, you're not necessarily looking to do like a big crazy synth solo or something.
Yeah.
No, you're not going to be like shredding fucking arps and stuff like that. Like you're probably going to be creating more atmosphere and like sitting in grooves for long periods of time. And, you know, that's what the genre is all about. Because, you know, also these decisions are informed by the type of music that we're doing.
Yeah.
You know, like if we're doing a bassline gig, we're going to approach synthesis very different to, you know, like an electro gig or a house gig. You know, you know, house may be much more sample driven, whereas bassline is going to be lots of silly wonky wobs. So, you know, you're going to want to pick those out. Yeah. So I guess like let's have a little listen through some parts in our track. I've got it open in Ableton, and we can just kind of like start soloing through some stuff. So kind of immediately we've got like these chords are pretty significant. We've got some more of these chords. This kind of starter chord thing seems to be the song, really.
Yeah.
if we like listen to that as like a full mix, like it's the whole thing. Even when the vocal comes in.
Yeah.
Then we've also got these pretty simple little prophet-y kind of pad.
Yeah, kind of nice brassy things.
And then we've also got this big arpeggiated bass line. Which I wonder if it actually does anything. I can't remember if it modulates or anything at all. No. Nope. Just goes.
Just chugs.
Just chugs away. Little chugger. So we've got some options there. And then when we get to the chorus, So we got a lead in that chorus. That's quite useful. That's a nice little sound. I mean, that's probably quite an obvious thing to gravitate towards in terms of choosing a part to play, right?
Yeah.
Then we've also got some pads. Equally, probably quite easy to recreate that sound as well. Oh, I'm soloing something else there. Yeah, I mean, but then as well as this one that I soloed by accident, fairly easy super saw.
Yeah.
Lots of detuned saw waves. You're going to get that straight away. And then we've also got an E piano, which, I mean, you don't even know that's in there.
Yeah.
It's probably a reason it's been left there from a mix perspective, but it's the lead and the chords is kind of your main chunk of that.
Yeah.
So I guess we should go through the different ways of, we've got our 3 different types of synthesis that we'd like to approach on shows, right? And we should approach these parts using those 3 types.
Yeah.
So if we start with samplers, I say samplers, I immediately go to sampler, but talking about software synthesis,
Yeah.
Of which samplers is an aspect of it. But there's I guess the elephant in the room that you have to address straight away is third-party synths.
Yeah.
Which I'm pretty militantly against.
Yep. Absolutely.
I think from when you started with a work in progress, it was just no fucking third party anything, Oscar.
Yeah.
No third party anything.
That was drilled into me straight away.
It will only create problems. It's always a nightmare. I know that a lot of people do use third party stuff, and they claim they don't have problems, and that's fine. But there's kind of lots of drawbacks that I think outweigh the pros. The cons really outweigh the pros when it comes to using third-party synthesizers. Partly, when you're approaching live, how much do you actually need real oscillation in that source before it hits, your envelopes and your filters and whatever? How much do you actually need that to be a real oscillator? Because that's where the third-party stuff is head and shoulders above the rest.
Yeah.
But the sound is already made.
Yeah.
Do we really need this to actually oscillate? And if you're smart with other methods of recreating that sound, then you'll be able to make it sound indistinguishable from a real instrument. Certainly in a live context.
Yeah, definitely. And even having said that, if we really need to have those oscillators there, then Ableton stuff is fantastic.
Ableton stuff is pretty good, yeah.
Wavetable is...
Yeah.
Especially for Serum users.
Yeah.
I think moving them onto Wavetable for live is a great shout.
Yeah. You actually did quite a lot of that with an artist recently where you literally just took the waveforms from Serum.
Yep.
Just put them in Wavetable.
Yeah. And then
copy the patch.
Yeah.
Copy the preset, settings,
all the modulation matrix is really easy to just move across.
Pretty much the same. And it was the same thing. And that was really good, actually. I remember because there was a bunch of MIDI control on different, filters. And there was a couple of weird, wave shaping stuff, I seem to remember, which was why we did it. And yeah, it worked out. I mean, it sounded like this studio perfect sound.
Yeah, it was very kind of serum-y and compressed and nice.
Just sat there, just in the mix, done.
Yeah.
I know that sometimes you're not always trying to be complete, absolute replica, studio grade replica, but sometimes you are.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's well, that sound is really good.
Yeah.
So why would we fuck with it?
Yeah,
we
and
I
think
steal the Serum preset.
Literally in production that was so tight and rhythmic and it had to be very kind of notched into where it sat. It wasn't a kind of it wasn't something we'd have gravitated towards a hardware synth for.
100%, yeah.
Sounded like something that was sitting in a mix rather than something that was being the focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that was a really good use of wavetable. I was really impressed by that, and how easy it was to program as well was really, really great. I mean, one of the other things that you'll not always, but like often have a problem with your third party is not just like headroom on your CPU, because like if you're running your keys in your track session, you know, the more audio you have in that session, the harder it is on the CPU and the more samplers and all this kind of thing. And then once you start adding third party plugins on top, like they're traditionally quite processor hungry. And that's kind of how you get them to sound good as well. They have to be running a lot of calculations all at once. So they need a lot of stuff. And you'll find when you're producing that's where your crashes come from, is your cracked whatever the fuck. But that's it, you know, like it eats up all your processor, crashes the software, great, perfect. And in a studio setting, that's fine because you can pick up from where you left off and you can, you know, print it to audio and then start playing it back and work on a different part of your tune, whatever. Whereas in live, if we crash the session,
show stop.
A high likelihood the whole show stops, including the fucking visuals. So, yeah, as much as you put in redundancies to switch over, like, don't put yourself in that position. You don't have to do something that destructive to your life. Like, don't choose violence.
It's okay.
It's okay. Like, you know, and also then when you need to troubleshoot that crash, which is that's the really boring part of building shows. It's like, when stuff breaks, because not if, it's when. When stuff breaks, you're then gonna need to send it. Well, you're not necessarily going to need to. Hopefully, it's just because you're stupid and you've done something wrong. That's easy to fix. I always hope that we've done something stupid if something isn't working, because it's like, well, we can fix stuff that we broke. It's when it's something that might be a bug in the software. It might not. It might be the way it interacts with Mac OS. It might not. It might be the way that Ableton interacts with it. It might not. It might be the way that Logic interacts with it. It might not. Blah, 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 blah. That long list of things. When you start talking to each of those companies, who do you think is going to take the blame?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, none of them. And especially Apple. Like, who do you talk to at Apple about your shit breaking?
Yeah.
You don't talk to anyone. They don't fucking care. They're Apple. They just get on with it.
Yeah.
You're like a niche use case. You're a fucking edge case. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they're like, nah. So you get this weird situation where it's called I call it my hot potato theory, which I've probably also explained to you a million times before. But where what happens is each of these companies start blaming each other. They all stand there like pointing at each other, being like, it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. And what never happens is your problem gets fixed.
Yeah.
Because everybody's so busy blaming each other. You're like, well, I got a show tomorrow. And like, all you motherfuckers are saying, it's Motu's fault. And you're like, Motu's not even here. What's going on? How did we get to blaming Motu? But yeah, like everybody blames each other. And until you're the one sitting there going, well, I mean, I guess we depreciate it. Like, we need to just remove it from the show because it's far too problematic for us to move forward. And so to just make sure that you never have to do that, you can just not put that stuff in the session. Yeah. It's very easy. You can just not do it, which is what I recommend.
Saves time and effort. And is then portable.
Much more portable. If you use the inbuilt plugins in general across pretty much any software, you can then run that session on another computer with that software just by turning up the session and the audio, which is so important in live world. So important. Because, you know, you can buy a MacBook Pro anywhere in the world, right? So if your MacBook dies on tour, you can just go and buy another laptop. And actually, with cross-platform stuff like, you know, Ableton, you can then run that on a Windows laptop. So, you know, why? Come on, guys. Just plug the show file in. Off we go. Great. Still got a gig. Fantastic. We can still go play a show. That's great. Because stuff does go missing. You know, it happens. It happens out there. So, yeah, like samplers is definitely, I mean, that's what I'm always going to go for.
It's the big one. when we're in the box.
You can get so far with stuff that sounds so good and still do like, you know, some filter modulation, like pitchy stuff. You can do a lot with a sampler.
Yeah.
That people often don't realize.
Absolutely.
You know, if you have access to source material, like I said with the Kidnap show, where you can do like a really nice multi-sampler where you've got like a few passes of each note, so that you can, I mean, particularly in Ableton 12, actually, the new update has round robin sampling. Which, have you heard of round robin sampling before?
No, I haven't.
So that's when every time you play a note, it plays a different version of that note.
Great. That saves some modulation routing.
Yeah. So we used to do it with a sample and hold LFO. That's how we used to do it. And now it's literally just like round robin. Like every time you press it, it can either randomize which note it plays next, not version of that note that it plays next, at that velocity as well. This is like it works off of the selector, so you can have this 3 notes per velocity, or 3 passes per velocity per note.
Yeah,
it's quite hard to explain because it does start to get very boring, but also it's how you get these samples to sound really, really good. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of clicking, it's a lot of RSI, but that's the way you get shit to sound nice. And get it to sound organic. And like, so like your big contact samplers that are like 5 gigabytes, this is basically what's going on under the hood. It is this kind of like round robin sampling and like having lots of velocity, lots of layers of velocity, like sounds that turn on when you turn the note off, blah 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 blah. But yeah, so with the round robin sampling, you can then either randomize the version that comes next, you can go to the next version forwards or backwards, or I think you can also like skip one. I'd have to have a look at the sampler again, but basically it means that you can across your layers of velocity, you can also never have the same note playing twice. Well, at the same time to an extent. If you get your numbers right. If you're doing like 3 or more, generally to any normal ear, with it isn't like literally A being against something, you're going to struggle to hear it. It's really, really, really great.
That is wicked.
And so like with Kidnap, who's a very good keys player, and that was a big part of his show, where we had like lots of piano for him and that kind of thing, because that's like his instrument. He sits down and plays it really, really well. You know, giving him that sampler, you really got the benefit of that. You really like couldn't tell when that sound was, well, you couldn't tell it was a sampler. I mean, it sounded like a synth, and then he also had a filter on it on an expression pedal.
Great.
So, you know, it's just like, it's just a synthesizer. Obviously it's a sampler, but it's just a synthesizer. The looping wasn't something we quite cracked on it, because that was, I think it calculated as like, it was like over 2,000 loops that we had to individually do across different nodes. we didn't quite get that far in the end. Fortunately, the notes were long enough. He was like, I'll never play them for longer than that. I was like, oh, great.
Nice.
We don't have to add the loops. God. Just like looking at it like, oh. I don't know if we have time for that. 2,000 loop points in Ableton Sampler. Very brutal.
That is savage.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's like doing a nice multi-sampler. You can just sample from a stem.
And we have gotten really far from sampling from stems and just like using your ears and sitting with it. And I mean, that's so important all the time. Listen to it. It's still music. Listen to it. It doesn't matter how much technical bullshit you're putting in. Like, listen to the sound. Does it sound right? Does it have the same vibe? Is it providing what the original source material was providing? You know, like, I think it's quite easy to get lost in that in like pop music, because pop music can become a little bit dry in terms of recreating performance, because it is kind of like, well, we just need the record. Which is also valid, you know, and it's like quite a skill to be able to do that without completely transparently bringing a record to a stage is an incredible feat of expertise and technology all coming together in just the right way so that it sounds right. You know, it's much easier to divert. It's much easier. But then in the same with any sort of audio transparency, it's actually really, really hard to get it to be really transparent. But also use your fucking ears. It's music. Listen to it. Yeah.
Listening is, but in fact, we'll probably come back to this quite a lot because we're going to do a bit of sound design, aren't we? And listening to things is such a big part.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And synthesis, I feel like it's got like when you're not kind of sitting with an instrument, there isn't air moving around you.
Yeah.
It's suddenly so much of your attention is on so many details. And it's, becomes quite a focus point. I think our synth patches probably takes up kind of the majority of our brain space.
Oh, such fucking nerds.
Yeah.
Podcast for performance nerds, and we're being nerds. That's what it is. So when you're building samplers, there's some good practices to follow, which one of them obviously is listening.
Yep.
And the one that you can hear it straight away as well, and it's one that I've just been making samplers for so long for shows that especially when someone new comes through, it's always like one of those that people get really, you can see people getting a little bit like, oh, for fuck's sake, I can fucking hear it again. Getting your start and end pops, removing them, those fades are so important. But without losing transient, don't lose the fucking transient. I want the kick drum to be the kick drum. I don't want it to pop. I want it to pop like a kick drum. That's a kick drum round. That's different. But it's a common like early problem, or a common problem to have when you're like not paying attention, when you're not listening, to have these little pops at the end of audio. And like what that is like you've got your sine wave, right, of your sound was doing this, and it's when you get to like here on a waveform and then have to go straight to zero, and that straight line, that's your pop. So what you kind of really want to be doing is like fading in a little bit, so that when you get to that peak and come back down, you're coming down as like a fade as opposed to that straight line. And those pops, like as much as it may seem, in your ears or in your studio, it's like, well, you don't really notice it in the mix. And it's not about, this is the other thing to always pay attention to with these sounds as well, is like, just because in your studio it doesn't seem like an issue, like your studio is relatively quiet in the scope of like what we're trying to create source for, because you've got to be mindful of the fact that this is going to be 110 dB in a massive sound system in a big reverby room, or a terrible sound system in a terrible room, which is more likely for most of the world. Most of the time venues do sound a bit shit. So those pops, when you put them against all the transients of your drums, like,
it's going to make a difference.
It's going to make a difference. It's going to ruin your mix at that volume. Because anything extra percussive is just going to clash in that bus compression. And it also doesn't sound very good, Oscar.
Absolutely.
It makes me very sad when I hear that. Like, come on, guys, get on top of your loop points.
Actually,
not loop points, fade points.
Another like hot tip for that, and I think the 404 Mark II does it, and the Octatrack definitely does it. Right. And you can look for it manually on Ableton. Is chopping from your 0 point of your waveform. Yeah, because it's quite a nice. It's quite a nice trick to be like, do you know what? I'm going to go from there.
I'm going to fucking be that guy as well. I'd be like, it's a cool feature. Doesn't always work properly.
It doesn't always work.
You still got to listen.
Don't
just assume that the snap in Ableton Simpler is going to give you exactly the 0, because it looks like it does. But if you listen to it, you'll hear a pop.
Oh yeah.
You'll hear a pop, and you need to fade that pop out, man. So once you've got something that like doesn't pop and squeak and do weird shit when you're playing it, if you need to sustain, then there's like loop points in samplers that you need to go through, and that kind of depends very much on the sound. Actually, going back to that Kidnap sampler that I was talking about, we didn't manage to get them all done because we realized there was 2,000 of them to do, and you have to do them each per note to get it to sound really good, which is a very labor intensive process. I need to figure out a way to do it with the script, really. But each sound will have a different point that's like nice to loop in. And there's lots of like different loop types. There's just like, immediate, like from, start to end, then back to start, to the end, back to the start, back to the end of your loop point, of your loop region, sorry. Or there's, like back and forth. So it like reverses the sound. Sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't.
Yeah.
There's, you know, you kind of have to just go through and have a listen to it, be like, oh cool, that feels really nice, that sounds really nice, or that doesn't sound so nice. You can crossfade how it's then looping, you know, things like that.
So useful.
Yeah, so to get those sustains, you're going to have to just kind of sit there and listen. And do, you know, like check out each note, like how much does it need to sustain for. But we've managed to create some pretty nice samplers from stems using those techniques still.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Not even having like a really nice bunch of notes just ready, like each individual note has been like, well, we just took the stem from the record and
yeah,
got
I think
single hits.
Reese's. We've gotten
Reese's.
I think we've both gotten pretty well versed at pulling a Reese out of the stem.
I think if you want to get good at making samplers, make some Reese samplers. Because also if you're into, you know, like drum and bass and that kind of stuff, you'll start to hear all of the production of like drum and bass tunes and old drum and bass tunes particularly. You'll hear it in making samplers with Reese basses. Yeah. 100%. There's like so many things that has come from a single Reese sample. Yeah. And what I find so interesting as well is you'll see these new, you know, like patches for Serum and stuff. The LFOs will like start key tracking. Yeah. Because to try and get that sound. Yeah. And that sounds just fucking loop points, bro. It's just fucking it's loop points on a sampler, bro. Yeah. You fucking think they had key tracking LFOs in the 90s? You kidding me? This is where someone's going to be like, no, they definitely did. Yeah. Actually, if you look at this particular sampler on this Metalhead record in 1995, get taken down, drum and bass. That's always what happens. Yeah. Okay, so like samplers, big software one. We'll make one in a second. I think that'd be a good little software thing to do. Yeah. Maybe the last thing to say about sampler is about samplers in general is how far you can get with your inbuilt presets. Like, definitely one of the brilliant things that Ableton did, I think it was Live 11, was an upright piano by Spitfire. Which is a great piano. Like, yeah, of course, it's not the best studio piano ever, but in the same way that a Nord Stage isn't the best piano ever, right? Like, it's a functional, decent sounding instrument. Yeah. Which, depending on the size of the show that you're doing, will depend on whether you should just use the Ableton piano or just use the fucking Nord. Do you know what I mean? You know, unless you have the resources to sit there and be like, oh, like, how important is the piano on the show? Like, this is the thing, I think, like, another common theme, I guess, of this topic is we're always looking at, like, what's the return on the investment of time and effort in all of this sound design stuff. Yeah. And choosing these synthesizers that are going to be, or any sort of, you know, whatever's creating that source, like, choosing that instrument is, you know, what's going to give us the result we need as quickly as possible, like within budget. Because I guess from like when you can kind of just sit in your studio and do it yourself, like ultimately you can kind of keep tweaking forever if you want. Whereas when you're moving more into like project-based stuff like we do, we've got to be conscious of having, you know, 3 days of programming, 4 days of programming, 5 days of programming. How do we use that programming in the best way possible to make sure that we have the best possible show at the end of it? I mean, maybe it's because of what we do, but I would argue that even if you're building your show on your own, you should say, like, here's my deadline. Yeah. So that you don't infinitely tweak. I know there's like a lot of theory in like writing and stuff as well, where you have to just say something's finished at some point because, I mean, I'm sure you find that in your artist project. How long could you tweak your pulsar beat?
Forever. Literally forever. Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah. And I think it makes you make those musical decisions as well. Yeah. When you're making a sound and you're like, do you know what? Is this important enough, like emotively and
100%
important enough to like look wise or playing wise or whatever for the actual show? Yeah. Or should we move on and do something that makes more sense?
Yeah.
Or leave it because it's not an important sound and it sounds good enough.
or should we just put it on track?
Yeah.
I think that's just the theme of all the podcasts, is at some point we say, I mean, should you just put it on track, guys? We don't just put things on track. Try to take things off track, but sometimes just put it on track, for God's sake. That little weird atmosphere crackle, just put it on track, mate. Don't have someone playing that, for God's sake. What are you doing? Okay, yeah. So, like, and on the theme of that, actually, like, let's dive into this. Oscar, I'm going to need your fingertip.
Absolutely.
Which, if you're listening to that out of context, it's not going to be great. Your manager's a bit of a lad, he'll like that. I'm. Do you know what? Just with this, I'm going to immediately zoom in on this lead sound. That's an E piano, not a lead. The lead is up here. So this sound here, very, very simple sound. And turning this into a sampler is going to be a piece of piss in Ableton. I can just literally cut the region of audio in this sampler out by selecting it and hitting Command E. And then I'll just quickly make a little sampler instrument with it. Right after I change my grid settings, and I'm just going to chop out like each note across the melody, ready to load into this part. Probably worth listening real quick to make sure we don't have any dulled notes. Can't sing at the moment. Oh, there you go. So we don't need that. So there's definitely like that note, they are the same note. We don't need those. I'm just doing this by ear. Sometimes you're lucky, which I think we are lucky today. And someone will just give you the MIDI for the part, which I'm going to do that just for speed. And I'm going to take that MIDI and I'm going to pop it on our new sampler instrument. Because I guess in the context of what we're doing now, we're going to assume that whoever is going to play this can play keys.
Yeah.
But equally, once you've chopped up each note, you could put that on pads.
Yep.
Like on an SP404.
Yeah, a sound like this would work great on a...
Yeah. Just, each hit was just like one pad hit. But for, quickly turning this into an Ableton sampler, I'll just pop it on a quick MIDI track. With a sampler in it. So let's load a sampler into our MIDI track. Where is it? There it is. And then I can just I can basically select all the notes that I need. And on my sampler, I can just drag and drop all of those notes. If I go to the sampler, there we are. And then drag and drop the notes that I've just chopped up from that line into the sampler. And then I can start moving them around to get them onto the right notes. So if I have a quick look at this MIDI, it starts on a B, C sharp, D. Okay, so I can then in Ableton Sampler change you've got these note regions or key regions, I guess, which is the keys that each sample should be played back when the sampler receives it. So you can kind of get them to cover quite a wide range of keys, and that's when you're going to start getting that pitch shifting. Whereas in this case, I want to make sure that this region is only for each note that's played, because it's quite common when we're putting together instruments for shows that we'll only ever use the notes that we actually need for the sampler.
Yeah.
So you literally can't play anything other than the correct melody. And this depends on the musician.
Yeah.
It depends on the gig.
I know, and definitely for pad stuff, I think. That's so often like you're just shooting in the dark.
Yeah. just play that in time.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. Actually, the amount of melodies like this we have played on SPDs.
I mean, it's true. Yeah. SPDs, MPDs, 404s, and it's not just us either. Like that whole Fred again, I call them Fred again pads now because of his interview with Zane Lowe, which I'm sure anyone listening to this podcast would have seen that interview. But you know, that's been a thing all the way back from, you know, like MPC, like people making hip hop on MPCs. That's literally where that whole technique comes from, is on the MPC, you would sample onto each of those pads and then you would play those pads back in a sequence to create hip hop beats.
Yep.
And, you know, that's a whole production style, and it works great in live music because, you know, nowadays there's lots of MIDI versions of these pads. You know, the MPD is the Akai make is the kind of obvious one.
Yeah.
But you don't, especially when you're working with people who maybe aren't such a good keys player, maybe they're more of like a guitarist, but they need to play like a pad part, or they need to play like a quick lead part over what they're doing, or vocal chops as well as another thing. It's really versatile. Yeah. Because it's good. It's the sample that you put on it.
Yeah.
Rather than anything else.
Yeah, definitely.
So, you know, you're not like totally, you're not bound to just doing things like a traditional music way. Like, think outside the box. Like, what makes sense for you? Like, what is your, like, what does your brand mean, like, as an artist? You know, who are you as an artist, man? That's what I want to know. Who are you? Let's figure out like what kind of unique instrumentation we can create for your particular brand, you know? I'm struggling with my keyboard shortcuts here. Great. That's going to look great on it's going to look great on film when I struggle with the Shift Tab shortcut in Ableton Live. It's going to look really good on YouTube. Fuck's sake, man. All right, so our next note is on E. So I'm just like dragging these notes around in the in Ableton sampler. Probably sounds awful on it's probably crap if you're listening on a podcast, great if you're watching on YouTube. And that last note is on A. So basically now, if I play back this MIDI line that's going to the sampler, we should have what sounds like that lead line. So that sounds like this. Looks like that MIDI is potentially the wrong octave. It is the wrong octave. There we go. Cool. So there's probably a little bit of tweaking that we need to do with that, because at the moment we don't have any of that tail. So I can just go into the envelope settings for this sampler, probably set it to one voice as well. There we go, that's starting to sound more like the original truck part. Great. Perfect. And the Mac has low battery. Why didn't we plug in the fucking MacBook? I don't understand why we did that. All right, cool. Well, look, so if we A-B that part that's ready to play to our original, probably need to work a little bit on some of the envelope, but it is just the part. Yep, you know. If we can listen back again. So this is now our sampler again. Pretty close.
Yeah.
I mean, there it is. And we could then like assign that to the keys on the Moog, or, you know, just get a MIDI controller, send the MIDI in, sampler, done. Great.
Nice.
I guess we'll move on to hardware next. Should we grab a MacBook charger before that?
Yeah.
Where is your MacBook charger?
Good question.
Great. Okay, so hardware, right? The things to consider on hardware. So different synths are going to be right for different sounds.
Yeah.
It's like a guitar versus a bass guitar, or a snare drum versus a kick drum.
Yep.
Don't ask them to do each other's jobs.
Yeah, definitely it is actually that extreme.
Well, apart from obviously, like Raw Blood is a good example of using a bass guitar to do lots of other parts at the same time, and it'd be absolutely rocking. But also, and also like it's totally possible, but you'll have lots of limitations with synths that, and also depending on the genre and stuff, you'll have these limitations of like literally the number of voices you can play at once. Things like the Moog, the subsequent that we've got set up there is paraphonic, which is, I guess, unusual for that type of synth, but also mostly it's monophonic. Yeah. Whereas we've also got a Novation Peak set up as well that we'll do some stuff with later. That is polyphonic up to 8 voices. But you can also get polyphonic synthesizers that go up to like 16 voices.
Yep.
And voices are kind of like the number of notes you can, kind of like the number of notes that you can play at the same time, depending on the settings on your synth. When you start adding like unison and stuff, then you can start having like 2 voices playing at the same time per note.
Yep. Yeah.
I guess, is that like a good layman's way of saying it?
Yeah,
is that
I
like
think
an intro to voices?
Yeah. Yeah, the amount of keys you can hold down at any one time.
Yeah, the amount of keys you can hold down at any one time is probably quite a good way of saying it. So finding the right instrument is the first kind of thing to do, and that's dictated by the part that you're choosing, obviously. Yep.
And the artists, because they've all got real little personalities.
Oh, yeah.
They're yeah. Each synth is a bit its own world. It's
got its own workflow. It'll do some things better than other things. It'll do, all sorts of weird little quirks. It'll have like, unique features. Actually, there's a really good example with the Peak versus the Moog, where the Peak has these little animate buttons on it, which we might play with in a bit. I don't know. We'll see how we get on. But it has these little animate buttons, which is like a unique thing to that synth.
Yep.
And the way that the frequency, which is sync kinda, but then when you've got it in duo mode and you've got a couple of notes going on, it kind of doesn't sound like it does it the same way as what you expect. And all the options in how you can loop and sync the filter and stuff is kind of quite unique on that Moog, at least for synths that I've used anyway.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different things, and like also the filter, the Moog filter is like quite iconic.
Yeah.
In terms of a sound, the Peak kind of, I don't even know, like what is the Peak filter supposed to be? Is it supposed to be a model of something, or is it just Peak filter?
I think it's an Oxford filter, which is like a alternate version of a ladder filter. Right.
I mean, sounds great. So
yeah.
Good work, guys.
Properly.
Sorry, I didn't know the Peak trivia. That's Peak trivia, bro. There's things that like the Peak does a lot of it's a wavetable synth as well. You can put wavetables in that, which we did a lot of on George Fitzgerald, and recreated a lot of sounds from his album by putting different wavetables in there to create lots of sounds for his record, which was really great. Worked really, really well for that. So I guess when we're talking about hardware, we should also talk about the different types of synthesis. Like your main types is going to be, your main type is subtractive.
Yep.
Like I said, the Peak can do some wavetable synthesis as well.
Yep.
Which is like Serum, like wavetable in Ableton. And then, you've got your other things, kind of like, your additive and your FM. There are some hardware units that do it, like the DX7 is kind of notoriously FM.
Yep. And notoriously hard to program.
And notoriously hard to program as well, yeah. I think that probably used to be a job for people at some point.
Yeah.
Just programming the fucking DX7.
Yeah.
But yeah. I don't actually, off the top of my head, know of any additive. Maybe I just don't use additive enough.
Well, I guess Buchler's the big one.
Oh, yeah, right.
But like, crazy expensive to take on the road.
Yeah, it's quite inaccessible for normal people trying to make normal shows.
Yeah,
I mean, even these two synths are kind of, they're not the cheapest. They're not the cheapest instruments, but much like a lot of like good instruments, kind of there's a lot of like small, interesting cheap boxes that have become iconic. Like the 303 is a really good example of that. Where that was never supposed to be an acid synth.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be like a cheap bassline accompaniment. And it just so happened that it did stuff in an interesting way that, as is tradition with dance music, people started using it the wrong way, and it just created something amazing.
It's
kind
of wild.
It was supposed to be like cheap, accessible, nothing special. And then it turned into this iconic thing, and like original 303s are quite expensive now because they're vintage. When you could just buy a Behringer one. Sounds great.
They do sound great.
Sounds great. Unfortunately, I got that one right. I guess once you've gone through your like normal synthesis kind of types, there's then obviously samplers. You can get hardware samplers. So when we were talking about the 404 earlier, the TR-8S is ultimately a sampler as much as it's marketed as a drum machine.
Yep.
I notoriously like to use it for things other than drum machines.
Oh yeah.
There's also what we got here. We got an SP16 somewhere in this studio.
Yeah.
Which is one of the pioneer ones. And that's kind of like the same as your Ableton samplers.
Yeah.
Again, load samples in, have fun.
Yeah.
See you later. There's like an MPC Live as well that Akai do. So there's lots of different options, depending on the sound that you want.
Definitely, which is the big question with hardware, really.
Yeah. Like what's going on in that sound? Like learning to listen for that kind of stuff. Like what is that filter doing? Is that filter opening? Is it closing? Which sounds like simple, but you'd be surprised how much people get that answer wrong.
Yeah.
When we work with them.
Yeah.
And how much they don't realize what's going on with that.
Yeah.
What's
going on within the sound, and some of the other techniques that they want to use.
Yeah.
I guess quite a big one for us is octave leaps.
Oh yeah, shit, yeah. I should get that up actually.
Because it is.
See if I can find it. Because we do a series on. If I open something on your laptop, is it going to show me something weird? It should be okay.
Should be okay.
Mate, touching another man's Safari is like we do a work in progress.uk. Why isn't that autofill, Oscar? Come on, man. We do a series on our on our YouTube. It's actually on YouTube and it's on Instagram, and it's also on TikTok, called Performance Techniques, which is just like interesting ways to use different boxes. And the first one actually is you doing that octave jump on the Boutique, Roland Boutique 101.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like quite a classic way to use the 101. Well, it's one of those sounds that once you hear it, you go, oh shit, that's how people make that sound.
Yeah.
And it's really fun. Like when you're sending like an ARP to something, it's a really fun way of just adding some like what feels like glitchy stuff without actually having to use something that's like actually going to glitch things out.
Yeah.
Right. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. It's a way to glitch something out and create quite a lot of space and have quite a big impact without having to do something like touch the filter.
Yeah.
Or change the resonance. And yeah, you can keep your settings and then just be playing with something.
Right. So this is the real Toasty. But that's it. All those little blips and bloops.
Yeah.
And that's lovely, that one as well. It's just like literally turning it up and down, right? And then when that gets caught in that delay and just goes over and over again, it's like a really lovely little noise.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it's something very unique to synths. I think it's such an old school synthy sound.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I think it was actually George Fitzgerald who told me about, who's like the oh shit moment, like learning about that.
Yeah.
He's just like, yeah, just do it like this. So I was like, fuck's sake, George. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's things like that. And like specifically for the 101, it has this big octave knob. So I can see how anyone playing with that, you're going to gravitate towards that knob and be like, what happens when I do this? Because experimenting with things is that's where you get all these really great ideas.
Yeah.
It's kind of the best way to get all these great ideas. Like diving into the sub menus isn't gonna get you that initial, oh yeah, shit. Because sub menus, you kind of have to know where you're going.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
you have a bit of a map in your mind of like, this is kind of what I want to be doing, and now I'm going to start exploring here. It's like the stuff on the face of instruments is generally put there because the designer wants you to interact with it. They want you to use it. They're like, those are your immediate controls that you need to be doing that you need to be like, designing with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely.
Broach the rest of them afterwards.
Yeah. No, for sure. And yeah, it's like you said, like as soon as someone's like, oh, I want to do this thing, we'll be like, well, let's think about a 101 or a mini Moog or a sub 37 or it kind of instantly starts that process.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how do you want to play that instrument then? Are you going to sequence it? Like in fact, that audio that you just heard, that was sequenced from Ableton, and you're entirely on controls.
Yeah.
Are you going to play it while you do that modulation? In which case, we're going to need to go, like the little Boutique 101 it's just a module. It doesn't have any keys. If you wanted to be playing that, well, then we're going to need to get you some keys to play with that.
Yeah.
Is that going to be a MIDI controller? Is it going to be whatever? Which, that's very much how you would like. In fact, with the Peak, it has a bigger brother called the Summit, which has the key bed and more voices. And it's like, well, if you want the key bed with it, that's probably a better choice. Whereas if you don't need that key bed because you're only ever really going to be modulating stuff and whatever, then the module's probably going to be fine.
Yep.
Probably going to do you a great job. Have you a great gig.
Definitely.
So yeah, one of the other things that we find really important is digital patch recall. Like you'll find that even the analog, because like the Moog is ultimately an analog synth, but it still has a circuit in it that will reset it to the parameters that you saved.
Yeah.
Because when we get into shows, you're going to have however many patches per song, per set, whatever. Like you may have 20, 30, 40 of these things that you need to switch between.
Yep.
They need to recall. It's the same thing as they were when you came up with a sound in the first place.
Yep. Yeah.
So, patch recall is important, and hopefully there's some patch settings so that we can do like the volume of the patch.
That's a big one for our workflow.
Really important. Our workflow, it should be for everyone's workflow, because when you've got these line level boxes on the stage, like you need to have some consistency in them. Like artistically, you may want to have inconsistencies, but from a mix perspective, it's like you want to be able to know that bass line is the correct bass line and it sits nicely with the kick kind of already.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like giving your engineer as many opportunities as possible to succeed with that mix and worry about, like, the live mics are the biggest nightmare.
Yeah.
Right? They're the one that every day people have to do a huge amount of work on to get them to be good, make them sound nice. Yeah. So anything with a circuit in it that can recall presets, make sure, like, if you don't, like, you have to give us the option to be like, I need to turn this patch down a little bit, or I need to turn it up a little bit. And that will sometimes dictate our decisions with instruments that we'll gravitate towards or gravitate away from.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a couple where, we've even sacked them off on shows because it's like, it's just too unwieldy.
Yeah.
There's things like things that are really great in the studio, like the Micro Brute's a really good example, where very interesting keyboard does some very cool stuff, but you're going to have to repatch that on the fly.
Yep.
Which, maybe that's your vibe.
Yeah.
But it was also fairly unpredictable.
Yes, I know. And we've had shows where we've changed arrangements of the gig.
Yeah.
to accommodate repatches.
Yeah.
Which is, it's I mean, it's great if you want to go down that route, but it's a hit that you have to take.
You got to make that commitment, and you got to be like, okay, I need to remember all of my patching. I need to remember where I need to move that cable to.
Yeah.
I need to remember to turn the volume down when I do it. Mm-hmm. Because who knows what's going to happen when I plug the thing in the wrong place. Because, you know, in your studio, it's lit to the way that you like it. And hopefully you have a low-stress studio. But when you're in a dark environment with flashing lights, just strobes fucking everywhere, you know, there's 5,000 people screaming at you.
Yep.
And you need to get that one little cable in that. Is it the gate or is it the pitch? I can't remember which one. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Literally.
You know, you've just gone for dinner with the label and had a couple too many fucking glasses of wine or whatever. Yeah. Like, yeah, it's gonna might not sound particularly good, the cock up that you made there.
Yep.
You know, we've done it. We've seen people do it. It happens.
Yeah.
And yeah, like there was one particular show that we did where they built that whole modular rig. It was Prosper, wasn't it? And Gosha from Prosper, he literally, because I remember him turning up and being like, I'm going to have a modular rig on the show. And I remember saying, oh, be careful with modular because like it's very unpredictable, and that's the plus point of it. So in the studio, that's creative and great. But you know, kind of what we're talking about now, like when you get to the gig, like we need the consistency so that it sits in the mix every time. And he said, I thought about this.
Yeah.
I've got a selection of modules that I'm going to use. This is how I'm going to make the sounds with it. We're going to make sure that the parts of the show where it's using sounds like it, you know, it's not too important. If it dies or goes so out of tune, I need to just fucking turn it down and get rid of it. Yeah. Then we can do that. I was like, okay, cool. Well, let's give it a go. And like you said, we put in arrangement time. Fucking arrangement time. What a ridiculous thing to have to call it, but that's kind of what it is. You know, time in the arrangements for him to do his patching. And you know, fair play to Gosha.
It sounds wicked, that thing.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Smashed it every night.
Yep.
Flawless.
No, it's great. There's a tuner in there, so he retunes.
Well, so that's like a good insight into the reality, right? He was retuning like every oscillator 2 to 3 times a gig that I saw him doing. You know, because I'm also like trying to look at it. I'm not just fucking looking at him and his modular the whole gig. Yeah. But like, you know, when I was at the shows, like that's all I clocked. Yeah. But it you know, likely more. Because you do have to make sure. Yeah. You know, those instruments are so organic. Yeah. You know, literally the mood of the room will detune. I'm feeling sad. Yeah.
One person not getting the drink they ordered.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I ordered a rum and coke. This is a whiskey and coke. Those aren't the same.
Oh, my oscillator.
Oh no, you put these... You put my modular out of tune with your negative vibes.
Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised.
Do you know what I mean? For God's sake. For God's sake.
But to be fair, that kind of stuff is where we've found that pairing synths with effects.
Yeah, and it's definitely driven our decisions on the types of effects that we'll recommend for people. Yeah,
for taming, controlling, and making synth sound produced.
Yeah, like there's a couple of kind of basic bits of EQ, right, that you're probably going to put on everything. You know, if your synth is doing mostly leads, chances are you're going to roll off some bottom end. Yep. I mean, I don't think there's really debate about that, is there? Yeah. I need my lead sound to have loads of low end in it, so it clashes with the kick and the bass. It's not the thing. But you know, there's some multi effects pedal like the HX Stomp. The Neural DSP Quad Cortex is something we've just started experimenting with a lot recently. Yep. You can recall different EQ presets. You can recall different compressors. You can recall different gain stages. And like when you've got all of those things after this box, all of a sudden that unpredictable synth is maybe a little bit more reliable. Yep. Because we did have it. Did the modular on Prosper? I imagine this is where the idea came from. Was probably from them. Because we put so much of that gig through HX Stomps. I think we ended up with like 4 of them on the gig. They were basically working as channel strips half the fucking time. Like a little bit of reverb, a little bit of delay every now and then.
Yeah.
And it works really, really well. Because it could just tame the kind of... Because, as much as the patches, as repatching was done, like sounds would not necessarily be the same every night. There was a lot of consistency in terms of, the patch is still the patch, right?
Yeah.
That particular res on that particular filter is generally going to sit in the same sort of space. You can kind of guess that. And it's not to do like front of house engineers out of a job at all. Like, it's still as important to have a good front of house engineer to mix it after that, because what you're doing there is creating good source. You're making source that's easy to mix. You're making something where on your 5-band parametric that you get in your sound desk, I now don't need you to do low cut. I now don't need you to notch that weird high-end resi thing. I've done that.
Yep.
You can use all of that to tune this with the bass and the drums and the room and the vocal and like the really important bits, right? Because you are limited. Like everything in Live World is really, really limited. You're not in the box anymore where you can just dump EQ8 on stuff. For just one after another to comb out whatever it is you've decided you've combed the life out of it. So that it can't breathe anymore. Strangling it with comb filters.
Literally. And like allowing your engineer to focus on the colour that they want to bring to the gig and bringing something out that has an impact. Rather than having to just deal with issues.
Like you spent so much time arranging and structuring your set list to emote the records, the album, the artist, and like get that, like make people feel the way that you've asked them to feel. Give the front of house engineer the opportunity to do that with a mix. And that's why it's so important to get the source right. And that's why we sit there and we just like, overthink like how many ways can I have these programs change to be like correct? Because then it's, that against your studio produced backing tracks against a bunch of other musicians who are playing really, really well. Like that consistency that's how you get gigs to sound good. It's that simple. Like give everyone a chance to succeed on your show. There's absolutely no reason not to. The robots do what they're told, man. They do what they're told until you tell them not to do the right thing. It's that simple. The robots are very stupid. Very stupid. So, the thing actually not to forget about adding the effects pedals to stuff is the creative side of it. The weird pitching effects, the reverbs, the delays, the modulation, all of them have their own kind of strange thing that you can do. And with most of the modern ones anyway, in terms of the HX, the line of Helix pedals and the Quad Cortex, you can assign a lot of MIDI control or expression pedal control or both. Which is pretty sick.
It is really sick. It's mad how close you can get to like quite wild production techniques with these boxes.
And if you're using the right MIDI controllers, you can gate the value. I mean, the thing is, actually, with most of these new pedals, you can gate the value that it will control anyway. Then you can further gate that with the values that your continuous controller will output, and all this kind of stuff. So it's like you can create chaos that still has control. It can be as chaotic as you want it to be, but then never quite push over to the point where it has just become a mess. Like, arguably, this is now a mess. It was really cool. Now it's a mess. So, and you are always kind of like, especially with creative effects stuff, you're always kind of like towing that line between, is this good or is this just trash and chaos? And have I made this worse? Have I arguably made this worse? Okay, so that's a lot of like the theory of that. We should probably get into making a bass sound. All
good. I'll just turn off our nice...
Oh no! Wow, it's so quiet and noisy.
The panic. I can hear my brain again.
The Shofar podcast is brought to you by the music direction team at A Work in Progress, a live electronic music direction company. If you want to find out more about us, you can get us on YouTube at A Work in Progress -UK, on TikTok and Instagram, aworkinprogress.uk, or on our website, aworkinprogress.uk, where you can also find our blog that has the show notes, diagrams, patches, all the stuff that you're going to need to help understand the podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again next month. Podcast outro done! Fuck yeah!